I'm Lisa Whitehouse. I'm Professor of Property Law, Policy and Practice in the Law School at the University of Southampton. And I've been researching in the field of housing law for the last 30 years. And in relation to my current project, I wanted to go out and find out how people deal with being in housing debt, and in particular how they deal with the threat of their home being at risk because of those mortgage or rent arrears. And so myself and my co-researcher, Dr. Tracy Vanava from the law school, we were funded by Aberdeen Financial Fairness Trust to undertake an 18-month project that allowed us to go out and talk to people with experience of housing debt and also those who work with them. But in particular, to go out and see if we could find ways that the law needed to be improved, and if so, how. So we went out, we did surveys, we did interviews, and we spoke to lots of people about their experience. And as a result of that, we've made a number of findings and a number of recommendations. So I think as regards the key findings of the project, I think they relate to two aspects. One is the reasons why people fall into debt, why they fall into rent or mortgage arrears and find themselves at threat of losing their home. And the other is what then happens when they try and deal with that debt. So when they try and seek advice and support for it. So taking the first of those, the reasons why people fall into debt, we found a whole range of issues. Some were very individual. So it may be that they've had a bereavement or they've lost income. We found a lot of people still reporting that the COVID-19 pandemic had impacted on them. So having been on furlough or on very insecure wages during that time, they were still trying to resolve the debt that had arisen from that. Other aspects, in particular, related to health. A large proportion of the people we spoke to had health issues, and in particular, what they would describe as mental health issues. And what we discovered is that there's a cycle of debt that can come from that. We also found that the causes of debt related to more structural issues beyond their control. So, for example, people who claim universal credit. Previously, particularly tenants, the housing element of universal credit was paid directly to the landlord. That would make sure the rent got paid. That changed when universal credit was brought in, and now it's paid directly to the tenant. And for whatever reason, many people find it difficult to make sure that that money goes to the rent. So sometimes they're pressurized by other creditors to use that money to pay off those debts. And so that was one of the reasons why they were in rent arrears. Another is that when you first claim universal credit, you have to wait 5 weeks for your first payment. Now, if you're on a low income, that's 5 weeks without any money. So you're already in arrears. You're already in debt. And again, that can be very difficult to escape from. So what we found is that people tended to be in a cycle of inescapable debt, quite often through no fault of their own. And the second aspect of our findings relates to why people don't engage in the arrears and possessions process. And by that I mean that they don't talk to their lender, they don't talk to their landlord, they don't turn up at their court hearing. And the reasons we found for that, again, were very numerous and complex. But there were also other structural issues, again. So some people were finding that they would try and seek help. So they would go to their landlord and say, I'm really struggling to pay my rent. And they would just be passed from pillar to post, having to retell their story each time. And imagine how difficult that is when you're in debt and you're a fear of losing your home. And sometimes the only advice was, pay your rent. And that really isn't that helpful when you have no money. So the policy recommendations we're suggesting relate to some key actors in the field. So in particular, we would like landlords and mortgage lenders to improve the way they communicate with their clients. So quite often, people reported to us that they would receive quite threatening letters telling them that if they didn't pay, then they would lose their home. Now, we found that to be quite counterproductive, and that just caused people to put their head in the sand, to stop reading the letters, to hope that the situation would go away. So we recommend that lenders and landlords improve their communication. Another recommendation relates to changes to the welfare system. The universal credit system, as we've found, has caused major problems for a number of the people that took part in our project. And so we call on the government, Department for Work and Pensions, to have a look at the way the universal credit system works, and in particular to reconsider the direct payment of the housing element so that it goes to the landlord and not to the tenant, and also to look at that 5-week delay in the first payment, to consider whether that can be shortened or to see whether it can be reduced entirely. The other is to rethink the way that debt advice is resourced. Recently, funding for debt advice has been completely slashed, and that needs to be rethought. So our experience with engaging with policymakers was really positive. So I find it's really important to have policymakers involved in the design and the implementation of the project. But then, of course, at the end, you also want to deliver your findings to policymakers. And this time, we were able, with the help of Public Policy Southampton, to have a round table in Westminster. And that was really well attended by a range of senior policymakers and MPs. And we were able to tell them what our findings were, to put the voice of people who had experience of rent and mortgage arrears at the centre of those findings, and to tell them the lived experience of people who were claiming universal credit. So in terms of what we hope for the future of the project, we really, really want to see it make a difference out there for people who are at threat of losing their home. And the way that we hope to do that is to work with some of the key stakeholders. So we're about to engage with some of the UK's largest mortgage lenders to inform them of the findings and to hopefully work with them in terms of improving the way they communicate with their borrowers. We also hope to work with some landlords, and some of the largest landlords in the country are local authorities. And we managed to get a number of them involved in the project. And because of that, we've developed really good relationships with them. And we hope to work with them to help them to improve the way they communicate with their tenants and the way that they provide advice. I mean, overall, our hope is that we will improve things for people who are at risk of losing their home because of rent or mortgage arrears, which quite often are not their fault. And to do that in a way that means that they engage earlier in this really important process. And that way, hopefully, help some people to keep their homes.